So when you're participating, let us introduce the panelist. Moderator is from Future KK Director for Tokyo Metropolitan Government International Finance Fellow, Ms. Hiromi Yamaoka. Next, let me introduce the panelist now. She is the moderator and a panelist from Mitsui Sumitomo DS Asset Management KK, Representative Director, President, and CEO, Mr. Takashi Saruta. Pleased to meet you. And also from Refinitiv Japan KK, Representative Director, Mr. Hideo Tomita. Thank you. From Mitsubishi UFJ Research and Consulting KK, Planning Management Department, Vice Deputy Director, Principal Sustainability Strategist, Ms. Mari Yoshitaka. And now we'd like to start. Mr. Yamaoka to start. Thank you. My name is Yamaoka. So today I'm the Tokyo Metropolitan International Finance Fellow in the Tokyo Green Finance Market. I am also the chairperson of the committee, so Green Finance Initiative, and I have been formulating Green Finance Initiative in Tokyo, the large cities like Tokyo, and also represented global green city, smart city, and becoming a green city and smart city, and that is the understanding of this. And also, in achieving green city, the role to be played very importantly by the finance. And therefore, in Tokyo Metropolitan Government, to be supported by the finance, and also using this finance, and that is one of the dynamics of growth in Tokyo. So from myself, let me introduce some of the introduction part, my presentation. So the global ESG finance, this is been growing in a very smooth manner. We have $35 trillion is about 3,900 trillion yen, and that will be expected to grow even though more so in the future as well. However, in ESG finance, of course, that is quite a potential market. However, there are some issues as well. ESG finance, the contents of that is quite varies, not just green bond, but also loans, equity, and also for the usage and social and sustainability, and those are included. And also secondary market. What about the secondary market? And that is a big challenge and issue as well. For this, in the finance perspective, and that is the existing finance mechanism is not be added, but the finance itself need to be innovated and reformed, which the element which did not exist in the finance before have to be added for the ESG-related activities. Next slide. And for example, one of the issue or challenge is how do we evaluate that ESG investment? It's a very critical issue. Of course, we have some of the rating agencies exist, but in the global evaluation or rating agencies, 450 companies, and these, if you look at the relativity correlation in the top research companies, that is their evaluation or the assessment is even though green or decarbonization, there's no standard, and that is not always established in criteria to evaluate on this. So for the enterprise and companies and investors, for the existing standard that cannot be too certain of these certainty on these assessment measure. Next slide. And let me also talk until I get the slide. May I? And in the next point that I wanted to discuss is in the sustainable finance. In the sustainable finance, the issue that the world is facing is the modern liberalism and the market economy. That how do we go away from there? Of course, the fossil fuel is the billions of years. we have accumulated the fossil fuels and by the solar energy, and that by excessively taking them out, and that we have made economic development. Economy have been developed, but can we continue in the same pace is a big issue. Of course, by controlling, can we achieve that by controlling it? But what about the economy? But the economy itself should it be just controlled? Is another big question. What is important in the liberal economy, free economy? What is the most desirable resource allocation should be desired for the human being, and what is the role to be played by the finance and risk recognitions and risk assessment and pricing. These in the market dynamism should be pursued so that the financial processing function to be used, what will be the resource allocation in the dynamism of the free economy. That is the new role to be played by the finance. By achieving so, that is good for the future prosperity of the mankind as well as for the earth. And today, these challenging but difficult but very critical issues facing these issues for the ESG finance, and we have the leaders and experts in this area as a panelist today. So we'll be asking their opinions accordingly. Now we'd like to start Tomita-san, Mr. Tomita, in the Japanese leader of from Refinitiv Japan KK in the finance and from data and the assessment and the information processing. So in that area, he is also from the London Exchange. Also quite knowledgeable about the situation in the world as well. So I'd like to ask Mr. Tomita the current conditions and also London and comparing with the overseas example. And from this perspective, that we'd like to ask you to speak. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be able to speak to you today. And for the sustainable finance, so-called the chains, entire ecosystem, I perceive that as a current understanding, is being well progressed accordingly. The procurement of financing and also investment side for the sustainable finance, in order to move and utilize the sustainable finance, we do need some players, initiatives, especially in London Stock Exchange, Security Exchange. Various groups are involved in that. By introducing that, I think we can deepen understanding of that. So first of all, in definitive, and Thomson Reuters, what you may think we are, so that you may like to clarify in using my first slide to explain to you. So as you see in this slide on top, that is the definitive, starting from the Dove for the communications in Thomson Reuters, finance, and third-party risk solution providers have become independent and to become definitive. And as you can see at the bottom is a London Stock Exchange group. And as you can see, this year in February, with the London Stock Exchange group have acquired Refinitiv, so that the Refinitiv is a part of a group of the London Stock Exchange group now today. And this new LSEG is in divisions, data analytics and capital markets and so trade. And these three business divisions that we have in regards to ESG, each department are doing different things, and let me introduce that as well. And in our data, as you can see, in regards to ESG, about more than 450 data cadence, and to support the ESG information of the companies are collected, and so we are more than 10,000, about 80% of the companies that we cover in the market cap, and we daily cover. Now we are increasing the numbers on daily basis.
So for the statistics, it's something that I'm going to explain more detail, but for us. In terms of ESG, sustainable finance, we have a broad coverage. Next slide, please. So this is for sustainable finance. So on the procurement side, the amount, including bond, loan, stocks, and some M&A are included. This is on a quarterly basis number. 2021, September, the number is also covered. As Yamaoka-san mentioned earlier, generally speaking, the number has been growing. But if we look at more detail, the last quarter we saw some slowdown. This is the insights that we had. And this is something that I will explain in detail later. So there are some definitions for statistics, and these are our definitions. And things that are relevant to this are called sustainable finance for our statistics purpose. And this is on investor side. This is the capital or flow or asset flow until June this year. On a global basis, this is the flow. This is how we have provided. There are some numbers underlined. Next, please. This is so-called AUM, assets under management. Looking at AUM only, the stock prices increase, and then AUM has been increasing accordingly. So we also compare it against net flow. This, I think, is important. And also, someone touched on earlier, index is another important element. For the index, Fuji Russell used to be in London Stock Exchange, and they joined our group, and we work together. And especially when it comes to ESG, Fitch-Fogg, Fuji's first time in Japan, we provide. And also, this criteria for the element in the fund, we provide ESG data. And also stock exchanges. Next slide, please. So green revenue at a certain level we choose, and then we give green economy mark. Quite many companies actually have this green label. And for the bond, we have the sustainable bond market creation, and also for promotion of transition. And we created the segment for transition bond. And also in September, there was the news reported for the first time, green gilts was also listed. When it comes to post-trade, this is something that we will do for the future. As someone mentioned, starting derivative clearing, we're going to start the activities in this area as well, probably. And from next week, there will be COP26. And our stock exchange group, we have been deeply involved in the activity. And also, Wak Carney is leading. Sorry, it's long name. Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, that activity. And CEO has been participating in that, even at the working level. So I want to point out one thing, which is the subgroup of that initiative includes Net Zero Financial Service Providers Alliance. That includes stock exchanges and the audit firms and information vendors are included in the subgroup. As I mentioned earlier, so that kind of activity, I think, is very important. This is also recognized in COP26, and this kind of activity has been more visible on a global basis. So for more detailed information of the activities will be disclosed more, but I think there will be improvement in the standard for disclosure. And we are just a week before starting COP26, and there was a word touched on IFRS, and also statistic information as well. If you look at the numbers more closely, you may have noticed there are many different numbers in it, and sometimes the base year is different, and also the definitions differ, as you just saw in another slide. So this kind of things needs to be organized, and also especially for carbon neutral 2030, Japan has set a midterm goal. So in more real-time data, not just the data from 2 or 3 years ago. So data covering until September this year, and the latest data needs to be used for the discussion. I think this is another important thing. So I would like to point out this is one of the challenges we have to address. Thank you very much, Mr. Tomita. Next, in ESG, and the leading company in this space, Mitsubishi UFG Research, Ms. Yoshitaka-san is going to provide us the latest information. Thank you. It's not a leading company and representing such a leading company in this space, but I have been involved in Tokyo Green Initiative as well, and also Sustainable Finance Loan Society by FSA. And that activity is also I have been participating in. I myself has been involved in environment-related activity for the last 20 years, and then I was given such a wonderful opportunity to speak in front of you. Thank you very much for giving me such an opportunity. As someone mentioned, the COP is going to start. In the last 10 years, I have been participating in COP, even in Glasgow. I'm planning to join that activity in Glasgow. But as was mentioned earlier, at the rapid pace, we are seeing the progress in sustainable finance. So although I have experience in the past, but it's very difficult even for me to catch up such rapid pace. And I think the same goes to the audiences here. So just as for the latest information, I just would like to share. So as Sarita-san mentioned earlier regarding Glasgow initiative, like Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, as you know, was established by former governor of England Bank and also special envoy to United Nations, Mark Carney, and also U.S. The special envoy to the president in terms of environment, John Kerry, and also another person take the initiative. So Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and also for banking and insurance toward net zero. And this is the alliance of the organization for net zero. And also this also includes service provider and stock exchanges. $88 trillion worth the activity joined by these organizations for net zero, and they also set the midterm goal. And even for G funds, there is G20 financial meeting underway, and for that commitment, there has been a proposal or recommendation by them. So this means that the decarbonization has been very, very critical item, even for financial institutions. As Yamaoka-san mentioned, sustainable finance covered broad areas, but decarbonization is very important keyword right now. And given this, as Yamaoka-san mentioned, in terms of pricing, as you know, in Western countries, emission trade started from 2005, even before there was such mechanism in the UK, but in US, for example, California, there's a exchange for emission trade, and in Western countries, they have had the mechanism for pricing. And toward the COP26, Mark Carney is leading activity for carbon credit. In other words, it's not the trade based on the framework, but based on the business and the carbon credit related activity. And for that, initiatives has already embarked on. So going forward, carbon credit will be more and more important going forward. So the quality and the infrastructure to support this will be more important. So this kind of a thing will be influencing to Japan.
So, as Mr. Yamaoka said, we should have the ESG money of 3,900 trillion yen. There are different options of investment. And we started with a green bond. And at the same time, for the decarbonization, we need a huge amount of money. So basically, for the investors, they are pretty much interested in green money. And ESG have become stagnant. And I was actually asked, and then the U.S. it's increasing, and Europe it's decreasing. The direction is that the EPF is growing, and in the Europe, green taxonomy coming up. So the situation has become very difficult. There are different ways to look at this, as Mr. Sarata said, and this is the based on the questionnaires. It's not really easy to understand. My concern for the challenge is like Tokyo initiatives, the green money, how to bring the green money to Tokyo and Japan. That's the biggest challenge. In the Europe and the United States, there are many money flowing to the different investments. So we have to come up with the same mechanism to bring this to Japan as well. That is one thing we would like to discuss today. Now, from the asset management viewpoint, I would like to talk about state-of-the-art initiatives. Mr. Sarata, would you share the current status and challenges in Japan? Good afternoon. As two of you just explained, when we look at the world market for the sustainable finance, there's a big movement right now. And all over the world, the ESG and getting attention, and how we can bring that to Tokyo, that's the biggest challenge for us. Of course, in the capital market, the participating investors are bigger. It should be further activated. If they would like to procure the fund, we need more investors. These are the 2 points that we have to organize. For sure, when we look at the world market, it goes green finance and related to ESG. The size is getting bigger, and we expect to have the even bigger market. When we look at Tokyo's the financial city initiative, to bring the same thing to Japan, we have a lot of challenge that we have to tackle. So these are some investment, and this is something you already know. When we look at stock market and the bond market, and with the values, this is recent numbers. On the left, this is all country world index and its ratio. Please look at that. The orange is Japan. It's just 66.2%. In 1990s and in 1989, the Nikkei average was the highest, and the Japanese ratio was 40%. I'm going to talk about before. And when we look at the total value of the Tokyo Exchange Market, the Japanese stock market hasn't grown that much. And when we look at the bond market, the blue is Japan. And so I think it's the bond market to issue the green bond. It's just 2.5% of the entire bond market. Next slide, please. So these numbers are from the Tokyo Exchange Market as of December 1989, which the share price hit the highest, and that was 591 trillion yen. And after that, we have more companies, and then we have 1.3 times bigger of the 745 trillion yen. When we look at the U.S. stock market at the end of December 1989, it's based on the S&P 500. It's smaller than Japan. It was 340 trillion yen, but now it has grown to 4,077 trillion yen, which is 12 times bigger than before. That's the fact. So this is the trend and the history of the bond market. Oh, that's true that Japan grew by 1.8% to the 76 trillion yen. But when we look at the U.S. bond market, it was times 2.9. So this is the capital market, the comparison of Japan and the U.S. And the next slide. So this is a publicly offered investment trust balance. Oh, this is a trust fund with the ratio and the actual numbers in the pie chart. When we look at the U.S., it's the biggest, as you know. And when we look at in Japan, it's blue. It's 3.6%. It's about 203 trillion yen. The individual the investors, we call it like a pure water. Except for some ETF, it's about 100 trillion yen. When we compare that to the other countries, are the foreign investors participating in Japan in a full scale? There are some public pensions and corporate pensions. They are not included here. So the real number is bigger than this. But when we look at the trust fund, this is the current number. So as I said at the beginning, the question is how the investors buy the bonds and the stocks of the corporates, and how the corporate procure their funds in the market. So the market should be very attractive. That is a key challenge in the Tokyo's financial city initiative. In order to become an international finance city, there are many possibilities, but when we look back over the 30 years, the market hasn't grown that much, as you can see here. So this is one of the challenges that we'd like to discuss today. Okay, thank you very much. Now, we would like to move on to the ESG. I would like to talk about the disclosure. For example, the green, environment, social. In order to evaluate these factors, what kind of information should be disclosed and how should they be evaluated? That's the question. So it's not just financial information, the conventional financial information. We have to disclose the wider range of the information that we have to face some issues, and we don't really have the international standard just yet. So related to ESG and information disclosure and evaluation, I would like to hear your opinion. Let's start with Mr. Tomita. Please. Okay, thank you very much. So how we collect ESG information, I will explain how we collect the ESG information. So please show the slide. So on the top, This is the corporate to disclose the data in the various forms. We collect them, and on top we have an NGO site as well as a global media information to collect data to store in a database. That's the fundamental. And then as it's not just to store as it is. It's not the case. Please look at the bottom part. There are hundreds of error check logics and the quality checks screeners. That is something we have a long history and experiences that we came up with. We use these tools to have the more accurate informations. We have to avoid any entry errors. And then we have to be consistent. And we have to store them in a database.
So then, and for this, basically, the data will be updated on the weekly basis. But basically, from the company side, as it's been reported, and also one time, some data are just disclosed only once a year. But for these intervals, need to be improved as well in some aspects. But also in the future, when the technology could be utilized using satellite information might be used in the future as well. Satellite picture might be used for that purpose. And also next one. So in addition to that, the disclosed data from companies, that what we are introducing is the companies, they have the voluntary disclosure of some of the tools has been created to provide the data of disclosure. That is the data that is already included in our system. And next slide. As you can see here, that is the new items can be added. Data can be added and edited as the data submission tools from the companies so that the data would be further enhanced and strengthened. That is how it's been done. Next. And for the Yamaoka-san slide, as it's been shown, in the assessment companies, evaluation correlation is quite low, has been already pointed out by the previous speaker, panelist. But for this part, that if I may make my own personal opinion, comment, that obviously, in terms of assessment, it is like a rating. In case of ESG assessment, it's different from debt or bond assessment. In case of bond, the default is from those aspects of the debts will be looked at. But in case of ESG investment, that is a quite diversified concept, and to evaluate on this, it is quite difficult in a uniform manner. For example, as you may know, for example, EV manufacturers, and for certain companies in the green society will be further developed in the future. And in addition to that, there's some opportunities to be further enhanced. And also other companies may look at also the governance in the near future or in the recent times to be looked at. So where they will be looked at will be different. Then that would also result in a different assessment and evaluation. It's not just an excuse, but if the current undertakings can increase the correlations among different assessment companies or evaluation companies like rating agencies, because the information disclosure will be further evolved, and then the data that can be used have been increasing. In the past, there was very little data, and then they had to do the interview to collect some qualitative information, and those how there will be different way of asking questions, and also response from the companies is not consistent neither in the past, but now when we have more data, then that should be improved. And also ESG assessment, ESG rating in the current method has been established in 2014 and 15, and it is relatively new. So the methodology itself should be further polished and improved in the future. But in addition to that, what is this high correlation assessment or rating would be quite useful for everyone. If that's the case, then depending on the goal, the purpose of, or to look at the purpose of looking at, for example, climate change or the green revenue can be just focused on. And if that's the way, then the result could become significantly different and be improved. But the start of this was to be furthermore enhanced in the future, but from the investor's perspective, would they be interested in certain company and look at the access the website and look at the disclosure information is such a tedious task and challenging. But then to have some common task, maybe we would do that, and so that to be using the format that is be able to be compared and those to be processed and so on. That is very important as well. And on the Miyazono-san from GPIF has already reported, the non-finance financial informations are those non-financial information will be further combined, and that will be needed to be do so. So that is why, in our case, in international coverage and information to be provided, that the role to be played by different companies are quite large. Thank you for your comment. Next, I'd like to ask Mr. Sarta, from the financial perspective, for the ESG development, what kind of information should be disclosed for the ESG investment? Please. So my first page on my slide, please. Without saying this, ESG investment serves the investing in equity and the debts is that is the most important factor these days, ESG. So that aspect will be further enhanced. Also, if we look back the past, as Tomita-san has already mentioned, the rating of the bond or debt. At the initial stage, the rating agencies and the company that will be rated against, and they have to spend and why to come up in such a rating result. And you want to increase the rating or to have more accurate evaluation of what they should do. They have considered how to do that for some time. Next slide. And based on that practice, as Tomita-san has just mentioned, and Yamaoka-san have all shown this in NFCI and FTSE graph, and how the companies are quite varied and distributed, and that such as uncorrelated conditions, and in regards to ESG, and using the Tomita-san's data, we may need to use, and also we may have a unique data maybe added to that, and what kind of evaluation or rating should be done, and what kind of things will be linked to the equity price. Those investors and being invested that need to be explained, and what kind of rating and assessment will be happening, and that need to be recognized among stakeholders. So let me repeat that the debt or bond rating, rather than the rating itself of those, for the ESG assessment, non-financial information and indices to be judged on a qualitative manner, then it may take even longer time, and that will be easy imagine. And once when this will not be stopped, but the actual contents need to be explained on both sides, and so that people will be persuaded that we need to continue to make efforts in trying to understand each other. At some point of time in the future, certain criteria should be established. That is what we've been assuming. Thank you. Next, Yoshitaka-san. Not just ESG, but also small and mid enterprise. Many different companies also need ESG initiatives. In order to promote such ESG initiative, I'd like to ask Yoshitaka-san, Mari Yoshitaka, please. Thank you. And what I have been doing, I live in the ESG, when I present about ESG in rural cities with the small, medium enterprise and the banks and financial institutions, they have considered, they are concerned with the trend of ESG. But on the other hand, ESG can be the good economic development tool and promoter in the regional cities as well. In Japan, we have indirect financing. It's quite common in Japan. When the climate change finance that I was engaged in, then indirect finance would play a very significant role.
On the other hand, even for bond, getting private offering bond is also taken care by banks. So for green finance, I think it's very, very important. And especially when it comes to disclosing ESG information, after global financial crisis, Western investment companies set a goal for sustainable finance, such as carbon pricing or climate-related service, has already started by Western investing companies. And then banks, in terms of green finance, they has accumulated a track record already. And Japan needs to catch up with that. And on the other hand, it's not just SME, but regional banks as well. The question whether this is green or not, or whether this should be considered ESG, probably it's difficult to judge. But in Western countries, there is things such as taxonomy, or to avoid greenwash, or to avoid sustainable wash. So there has been directive in Western countries. However, in Japan, METI has set the green growth strategy, and there are priority items. It's more like bottom-up to realize green and to create companies getting investment. That's what's happening in Japan. And then to the companies which are supposed to get invested, and they're still searching which companies can be candidates, and I think this is the first step. Especially when it comes to regional banks, of course, some of them have purchased green bond and getting the private offering bonds already. But in this sense, usually regional banks have dealt with SME. So for such SME, if they want to be involved in SDGs, and then the SDGs, that SMEs can be the target. And for regional banks, those are the companies that the regional bank can be engaged in. And as for pricing, I mentioned this earlier, but in Western countries, for pricing, there is for example, pricing for carbon, they have accumulated the data to a large extent, and Japan has not really yet. So this is something that METI and the Environment Ministry have already started to discuss. And also on the bank side, partnership carbon accounting. That is an initiative taken on a global basis, and banks have already participated in the initiative for the bond to assess assets. That activity has already started in Japan too. So by getting information more, and the companies can be prepared to disclose their information. Thank you. So now we'd like to open the floor for Q&A. We have already received many questions from audiences, so we have a time constraint, so I have to pick up some. So first question to Yoshitaka-san, I will read the question. This is about ESG information disclosure for SMEs. This is something that Yoshitaka-san has mentioned. And there has been discussion on the framework for information disclosure, but when it comes to SME, disclosing information may be costly, too costly for SME. So action that can be taken is maybe creating the simplified guideline for SME in Japan. Do you think this could work in Japan? That is the question to Yoshitaka-san. Thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. Whether a company is listed or not listed, or maybe depending on the scale of the businesses, even among SMEs, there are many different sizes of SMEs. So the first step is to see whether you have a contract with listed companies. Even for SMEs, if SME have the contract with listed companies, and then in terms of managing supply chain, and there are some aspects for the evaluation. For such SMEs, the key points for information disclosure can be selected. And then if there is a guideline for such key points, that would be helpful. Actually, in Environmental Ministry, they have already developed some case examples already. Okay, thank you. So next, about the certification criteria for Japan, and there is a difference between Japanese criteria and global criteria. So I will read the question. Yesterday, TSE announced to establish the committee to consider green bond framework. So there's a word here in this question. What kind of direction? But it would be difficult to answer in terms of the direction. But the certification framework like this, and there is a global standards such as taxonomy. How can we make the correlation between the Japanese standard and the global standard to help development ESG finance? That is a question. And what do you think, Mr. Sarita? It's very, very difficult question to answer, but I will try. So looking at globally, if the criteria is standardized on a global basis, that is the best thing. However, looking at the many countries in the world, the situation facing each country differ. So to the question as to whether or not it's the best thing for Japanese standard to be adjusted to the Western standard, I don't think it's not the right answer. Rather, thinking about the Japanese companies or capital flow, from this perspective, maybe we should standardize the standards or criteria to some extent. But it's very difficult. Situation differ from country to country. The amount of the coal usage differ from country to country. So maybe we try to have certain range in terms of standardization of these criteria. Yes, when it comes to taxonomy or certificate, we will see more race among countries to get the lead, to become the leader in terms of establishing the standard. So it's a very sensitive issue to some extent. Okay, in relation to this, I have a comment to make. Okay, go ahead. So sustainable stock exchange, where stock exchanges in the world are joining. This is an organization. So the list for the listed companies involved in those stock exchanges, those companies are asked to disclose information. So they are trying. They developed a common template, and it was announced at the end of June this year. However, as Saruta-san mentioned, situation of each country differ. So they say that each country can adjust their template to their situation. So, Yoshitaka-san, what do you think? Yeah. So I have worked in many Asian countries for years and years, and I saw many differences in terms of energy mix and also the level of economic development. So situation of each country differ. And the most important thing is how we can trigger the transition. Well, 2015 in the COP and the Paris Agreement was made. And recently, we are seeing the pension fund recently participate in COP meeting. They said that the role of financial service is to create a transition. It's not to make a judgment whether it is good or bad. So the point is the transition for each country needs to be triggered depending on the situation of each country. So we have time constraints, so this is the last theme. Slide, please. Tokyo Green Finance Initiative. This is Kodama-san from Tokyo Metropolitan Government explained. This is the update International Financial City Tokyo. And green is one aspect to help developing Japanese business in Japan. So ESG finance, of course, is very important in terms of developing business and finance and people's wealth. So I would like to ask each of you what your expectation from Tokyo and what should be done by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. So Tomizu-san, could you make a comment first? Any expectation? So as was mentioned, 2017, December, Tokyo and the City London Corporation entered into MOU. So there are many MOUs for us around the world, but this particular MOU triggered very active initiatives. And probably starting from next year, we will see more people coming to Tokyo, so this will be more important. When it comes to UK, this is the chairman country of COP26 until COP27. It will continue to be chairman. So the cooperation with London, including taxonomy, and we may have seen some competition or race among countries. So relationship with London and EU will be very powerful relationship, I think. So I have been involved in Financial City Tokyo activity, and my colleague in London, they joined the equivalent organization in London. So maybe through cooperation on both of us, we can approach from both sides. Thank you, Saruta-san. We have actually received a question to Saruta-san. You touched on the overall expansion of the market will be important in terms of developing ESG. Is there any reverse relationship? I mean, development of a green market can be conducive to the development of financial market. do you think this will be the case? That's a very difficult question, I guess. But so regarding expectation and also any comment on the dynamism of Tokyo financial market. So, okay, for me, green finance and other sustainable finances, ESG finance could be, and the market development. And to the question, which should be the priority, I would answer it is the market development. So the executive summary of Tokyo City and the slide, could you pay attention to the slide of the executive summary of Tokyo Metropolitan Government? Okay, at the bottom you can see 1, 2, 3 for the initiatives for the future. I think the important thing is the strengths of Tokyo or strength of Japan, I would say. These 4 things are very important. So individual financial asset, 111 trillion, including individual deposit, and whether it should be through direct finance or indirect, or we have to get those this affluent asset in the market. Otherwise, we cannot realize 1, 2, 3. So I would say expansion of a capital market would be the priority, top priority. This will eventually come with sustainability. Well, as I mentioned in my graph, the TSE is leading the stock exchange in the world. And also we have the GDP amount. But the issue is, in the last couple of years, that market has not grown. If the market is growing, it can attract investors and capital. So with that, we have to get out of the market which has not grown to be able to actually take those initiatives. So
that is something we have to achieve. So we have to collaborate from the investor's viewpoint. What is more important is all the participating investors, they are asking growth for the businesses. When you say sustainable, we think ahead like 10 years and 20 years from now on, but we have to consider the current growth. And then there's no future growth either. As Tokyo Exchange person said, we have to continue our effort to improve the performance of the businesses constantly. That's how we have to work on to the investors. Okay, thank you very much. Now, Ms. Yoshitaka, from the wider viewpoint, would you share your expectations and issues that you think as the Tokyo? As Sarata-san said, it's about growth. So that growth is a part of the green finance strategy. There are many capable companies in Tokyo, and then we have the largest number of the patents in this area. But the Japanese companies are not good at using these for the growth. So that should be visible to the investors. That's very important. So in that regard, the Tokyo's international finance city and the green finance initiatives there, I think I have a lot of expectation for that, especially the strengths of the Tokyo. It doesn't say that, but as I said, the carbon pricing or the emission, the trading, that's the Tokyo. The Tokyo has the data. So at the same time, the pension fund, as well as the corporate pension fund of the large companies, there are many investors from there, and then also the individual deposit and the savings are there in Tokyo. So that should be all involved in the initiative. That's my expectation. And at the same time, I would like to conclude my thought that when we say decarbonization, and when we talk about climate change in Japan, it's a physical risks, the natural disaster. We have to be very resilient against the natural disaster. So in the scheme of the International Finance City, that is something we have to emphasize. Related to Ms. Yoshitaka, I have a question. There's a question about the carbon pricing. In Japan, the discussion of the carbon pricing is not proceeding compared to the other countries. But we have a tax, carbon tax, and cap and trade, and the emission trading. There are many different ways. What would be the best way to Japan? What would be the best method for that initiative? That's the question. Yoshitaka-san, I know this is a difficult question. Yes, it is a difficult question to answer, and there is no one answer. And in Japan, on the upstream, there are like the fossil fuel tax or the GHG tax, and on the other hand, there is emission trading, the J credit. In the past, there are some simulations that we conducted. What was the quickest one? Is a taxation. That's the quickest to move forward. And on the other hand, for the businesses, what would be the best? There are some options for the businesses. So this discussion should move forward. And we have to have the predictable CO2 asset value for the financial institutions. That will be the system that we have to come up with. Thank you very much. For the Tokyo Green Finance Initiatives, Mr. Yoshitaka was involved in the discussion. And then I would like to summarize. In Tokyo, it's a stakeholder. If the environment is damaged, it's a city. It has the biggest negative impact for the climate change. And then there are more expenses from Tokyo. That means the tax will go up. So that means that will deteriorate the influence, the everyday life of the residents. So Tokyo is a stakeholder. So Tokyo has to be very serious to solve this problem. And then in this slide, the finance has a big key. Pricing and risk management can be used to have the best resource allocations. That this has become very difficult. This is not a risk and return. It's three-dimensional, not just risk and returns. So that means the finance should play the bigger roles that's expected. So, of course, the finance area has to contribute in a big way. The next page. So the finance has the tools and the pricing, the risk management, and this circulation, the assessment is necessary to see if the fund is appropriately allocated. And this cycle should be turned to improve the lives of the Tokyo resident. We have the representative from this area, from Japan, and we have a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. Thank you very much, all the panelists and Mr. Yamaoka.